Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So hopefully I've got an interesting video. So today we're going to be discussing what is the best way to get onto the AM5 platform. What's the best budget build, entry level build, with the main sort of emphasis being on upgradability in sort of 12, 18 months time. We need to sort of offset the price of DDR5 somehow, get on the platform, because if AM4 is anything to go by, AM5 is going to be with us for, a long time. So I said in the last video, AM4, we don't really want to be sort of, especially for a new build, we don't want to be going on to AM4. Fine if you're already on it, you can upgrade, change a few bits. But for a new build, we need to be looking at AM5. So as you can see from the background, we're going to be looking at the Ryzen 5 8600G. So let's get into it. So I've chosen the 8600G because it can be had for a really good price on the second-hand market. So we can see here on Facebook Marketplace, there's one going for £90. Now I paid £100 for mine. I thought that was a good deal, but that is just crazy. So that was the main reason, just for the price. When you look what else you can get for £100 on the CPU market, you saw AM4 sort of 5600Xs. I think the cheapest sort of 7000 processor you could get is maybe between 120 150. Now the 7000 does have an iGPU on there, but it's only sort of good for browsing the internet, watching videos. Might be able to play Roblox on it and stuff. But the on the 8600, it's got the 7060M Radeon graphics on there, and it's very capable. It will do sort of Fortnite 1080p on performance mode. It will do like 90 frames a second. It's like crazy. And I did some benching on Cyberpunk 2077 on, I don't know if it was low or medium, but it was hitting an average of 40 frames a second. It was really playable. So yeah, it's dead impressive. And the next, I think the 8600G is a lot better, but it's twice the price. I say a lot better, it's probably 20% quicker on both graphical sort of performance as well as CPU performance. But like I say, it's twice the price. It's not really worth the extra money. And obviously we're talking budget build here. So we're going to do some testing anyway. So I'll do some synthetic, just do some, benchmarks for the CPU. And then we're going to do, I'm not going to test it as like the iGPU, we know it's capable, but I'm more concerned about when we pair it up with a dedicated graphics card, how's the performance compare to like an AM4 processor if you went that route? Because for like £100, you're going to be around the same sort of area. But then obviously you need the dedicated graphics card because the AM4, like the 5000 processors, they don't have the iGPU on board. So just want to see how the performance compares, if it's struggling, if it's holding the graphics card back, or whether it's a good sort of gaming chip to put the dedicated graphics card. So let's go over and do some testing, and we'll also discuss some of the limitations of the 8600G as well. Now the 8600G does have some limitations, so we'll just discuss that now. So if we look down here, we will see it's only got 16 meg of L3 cache, where it's like half that of what like a 7000 or 5000, any like 5000, 7000, 9000. As long as it's not the 3DV cache, it's got 32 meg of L3 cache. So in scenarios where you're sort of CPU bound, like high 1080p frame rates, that might be an issue, but we'll see that. And then the other issue we have is the PCI Express. We've only got 20 lanes, but out of that 20, only 16 is usable between the GPU, the motherboard chipset, and the NVMe M.2 like type drives. So when we do put a dedicated graphics card on this, we're going to be limited to a PCI Express Gen 4x8 slot. So we're going to see what the implications of that are as well, whether that's going to be an issue. But apart from that, we should be all good. Let's have a quick look at the system, because this is the system that I'm recording this on, is the system. So as you can see here, 8600G, it's a 4nm process. We can see there the 16 megabytes of L3 cache. If we go to, in fact, yes. Let's open up GPU-Z. And we'll see what I mean about the, where is it? It's on my other screen. Boom, bring it across. So yeah, we can see here PCI Express. That's the interface of the card, but it's running at PCI Gen 4 by 8. And that's because that's all the processor supports. Even though the motherboard supports PCI Gen 5, it's only running that PCI Express 4 by 8. Make sure it doesn't change when we put a bit of load on it. No, staying the same. So yeah, so PCI Express Gen 4 by 8. That's all we've got. So that should be good for 16 gigabytes a second, I think. So we're like half of a 16, which obviously makes sense. So that's the limitation of the processor. So we've got a small amount of L3 cache, and then we're only PCI Gen 4, and because of the limited lanes, we're only going to be running it by 8. So let's go over what tests we're going to do. So let's have a look at that now. So testing wise, we're going to be doing some CPU testing, so just some sort of Cinebench, and then we'll use some MEM-Test64 to look at some memory bandwidth, as well as some MLC results, and then we'll get into the gaming. So we'll do some Shadow of the Tomb Raider for that CPU sort of bottlenecking, sort of 1080p low, and then we'll do some normal 3D Mark synthetic benches. That should highlight any issues we have with PCI Express bandwidth to see if there's any difference there. And then we'll also do some Cyberpunk as well, and some Unigine Valley, just to see any sort of CPU bottlenecking issues. Motherboard wise, I didn't really go over it, but I've got here, it's a B650M motherboard. It's the gigabyte. You want to pair it with at least a B650 or an B850 or an X670, something that's going to unlock the power limit, because that 65 watt is shared across the GPU and CPU. So you do, it will sort of let you get up to about 80 watts, but it does sort of pull back quite a bit. So when I was saying before that it plays sort of 90-ish frames a second on Fortnite, when it's hitting sort of towards 90 watts, it does get a bit choppy on the old frame time graph. Whereas if you have a chipset like the B650 or the B850, then you can unlock that power limit and you get a lot smoother experience. Plus you can use PBO to like increase your boost clock and stuff as well, which this processor has done to it as well. I have actually paired it with a 6400 memory kit to give it the best opportunity to sort of shine, but I couldn't get it to run at 64. I'm stuck at 62 CL30, but we'll see some memory bandwidth tests in a bit. But yeah, I just want to go through that motherboard and like the tests. So let's look at the results then. So we are mainly going to be comparing the 5800X to the 8600G, just because I want to see if the 8600G is better than the AM4 performance, mainly in gaming, but we're going to look at CPU performance as well and just see how we're getting on. So we can see here in Cinebench 2024 that the single-threaded performance of the 8600G is 14% more than that of the 5800, 114 to 100. But obviously it does miss out on the multi-threaded performance because we're missing 2 cores, 4 threads, but it's only 4% down. So it's 870 to 905. So, 4% deficit, I think that's quite respectable. You can see how the performance compares to the 7700X and the 9700X. The 9700X single-threaded performance is another 26% more than that of the 8600G at 144, which is quite far ahead. With them, I haven't included it on here, but I did the Cinebench 2026 test. And it was a similar story to the 2024. So the single-threaded performance, the 8600G is 13% quicker than the 5800X. That's 462 to 408. And then a similar story with a multi-threaded, but it's only 6% slower. So it's 3,510 to 3,717. That's multi-threaded performance in Cinebench 2026. So although it's missing out on 4 threads, it's only 6% behind. So that's quite respectable. So let's look at some other CPU benches. So CPU bound testing. So this is what I normally do in previous videos. I've used Unigine Valley as well as Shadow of the Tomb Raider, sort of low settings. So the GPU's not fully utilized. It's purely CPU bound. Basically, the CPU cannot provide any more frames a second for the GPU to render. So we can see here that the 5800X against the 8600G in Valley, the 8600G is actually quicker, 251 frames per second to 222.5. So that is a plus 13% lead for the 8600G. And then slight reversal in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We've got the 5800X at 255 frames per second to 235 for the 8600G, which is 8.5% slower than the 5800X. Now, I'm pretty certain that this is to do with the L3 cache. It's obviously got half the amount, and I'm pretty certain that because it's ahead in the Unigine Valley, that's probably to do with the increased clock frequency and the newer sort of architecture, improved IPC and stuff. But for the Shadow of the Tomb Raider, obviously that's still there for the 8600G. It's still clocking about 5.1 gig, but we can see it's just not there. It's like 13%. What did I say it was? Sorry, 8.5% down. So I'm guessing that's got to be to do with the reduced L3 cache. So some more CPU performance benches. We've got CPU Z. Used the benchmark in that, and we can see that the single-threaded performance is 715 to the 8600G versus 638 for the 5800X. So that gives us a 12% lead to the 8600G there in the single-threaded. And then no surprise, again, in the multi-threaded, it loses out. So it's 5,671 to 6,739, which is nearly a 20% deficit there to the 5800X. And a similar thing is shown in the CPU profiler in 3D Mark. So we're single-threaded, we've got 1030 versus 973, which is a 6% gain to the 8600G. But then again, like I said, minus, near enough 20% down on multi-threaded on that, which is quite a lot. I didn't think it would be as much, even though I suppose it just makes sense, like the 4-threaded. If you normalize the single-threaded performance into like an 8-core, then it probably would be quicker. And then finally on the end there, we did a memtest 64, and I don't know if what I do with this. So the memtest 64, obviously it's a stability program, but what I'll do is I'll do 15,360 megabytes test for 10 loops, and then obviously just set it off, and it's the quicker the better, basically. And it's a bit of a memory bandwidth as well as CPU test as well. So we can see that the 8600G with its DDR5 memory is significantly quicker than the DDR4. So it's 472 seconds to complete that test versus the 825 for the 98, not 98, the 5800X, which is a result of, it's going to be different. I've got my slide here. Yeah, so it's 75%. The 75% slower the 5800X is. So that is substantial. So apologies, my ugly mug is in the way. So there's what I was talking about on the memtest 64 results. So I didn't realize that my ugly mug was in the way of that. But if we just move on to the next slide, we've got some normal sort of gaming. Can't see, let me move myself over here. So we can see that I did a Borderlands 4 test and I did a Cyberpunk 2077. Now this is 1080p, it's Ray Trace Ultra for Cyberpunk, and then it's Badass, which is the maximum setting for Borderlands 4, but they're both with the upscaler. So it was DLSS balanced, and we can see that in both tests the 8600G is quicker. So whether it's the new architecture or the higher clocks, but like this is kind of like what I'd normally sort of game at in these games. I'd be sort of just using the upscaler to try to get the frame rate up a little bit. And the GPU is not fully utilized, so we are still CPU bound to a certain extent. But we are at 100 frames a second in Borderlands 4 from 95 on the 5800X, and again, and these are repeatable as well. I had to like run them multiple times, and then in Cyberpunk 2077, so that's the built-in benchmark, the 118 frames a second for the 8600G to 114. For the 5800X, and what's that in gains? So if we're looking at Cyberpunk 2077, it's a 4% gain for the 8600G, and then in Borderlands it's 5% gain. So yeah, so it's definitely quicker. Moving on. So for the 3D Mark results, I thought I'd just go into the results themselves because it's quite good. You can set up some comparisons. So, but just to sort of summarize, really, I suppose, is there's very little difference. Steel Nomad, Solar Bay, and Wildlife Extreme, they're all very similar. So if we sort of just choose any two that they've done, so that one is a 5800X, and then let's find a 8600G, add to compare that. You can see, yeah, exactly the same, 0.4% difference between the two, which is what you'd expect, because synthetic graphic benchmarks, they're purely just using the GPU really. There's very little CPU load, and it is purely dependent on the graphics card. Let's have a look at another two. Let's clear that. Let's go back. Let's have a look at some Steel Nomad. So add to compare on that one. Oh, why is it still clear? Well, let's have a look at Solar Bay Extreme, because I can see that at the top. Add to compare. That's the 8600G and Solar Extreme. Add to compare. So 3% in favor of the 5800X. So could that be a limitation of the PCI Express Gen 4x8? Maybe, possibly. I'd say that is a possibility there. It won't have anything to do with the less, having less L3 cache, because the CPU's not really doing anything in these scenarios. Let's go back. That's the only one that is different and I don't quite understand it, is the Firestrike. Now, obviously, the Firestrike does have a CPU benchmark built into the benchmark, but even not considering that, we'll see. Let's get the Firestrike. Add to compare. That's the 5800. Where's the 8600G at the top there? Add to compare. Compare that. Oh, compare that. So we can see we have a near enough 10% improvement on the 5800X, and if it's not just the CPU. So look, graphics test 1 is 8% quicker, graphics test 2 is 8% quicker. The physics test, which is very dependent on the CPU, is 16.3%, which makes sense because it's got more cores. It is a multi-threaded test. And also the combined test is what you'd expect, because the combined test uses the physics, so it's the physics and the graphics. So that you'd expect that to be higher as well. But these graphics test results, I just can't make sense of, unless it's like it can only be the PCI Express Gen 4x8, but it is a lot more than all the others. The Steel Nomad is pretty much the same. Port Royal's the same. So I don't quite understand that. So it just shows the whole purpose of this really was to say that the PCI Express 4x8 doesn't actually make that much of a difference. Maybe 3%. Well, if you judge them out, 3 to 8%, I suppose. But if we look at, I did a PCI Express test as well. So obviously this is just going to tell us what we already know. Add to compare, and then add to compare that. So we can see it's twice as much, because it's twice the bandwidth. So the 5800X uses PCI Gen 4, but it's a full by 16 lane it's using. So you can see there that it's 28.18 gigabytes a second out of a theoretical 30, which is pretty good. And then for the 8600G, we've got a 14.48 gigabytes per second for half the bandwidth. So that's pretty much what you'd expect as well. So yeah, so with all that the 3D mark sort of stuff out of the way, the PCI Express Gen 4x8 doesn't seem to affect as much as what I thought, especially because we're using an RTX 5070 Ti, remember, so it is quite a powerful graphics card, and we're getting pretty much the same results as what we did on a by 16 slot. So yeah, let's move on to some other results maybe, or conclusions. So I'm just running Firestrike, and I just had Presentmon running with it just to make sure that it is GPU bound and the CPU's not holding it back. Just trying to sort of figure out why that 10%, what was it? It was 10% difference between the two processors came from. And it might be a bit of both. It could be the PCI Gen 4x8 sort of holding it back, maybe 3%. And then the L3 cache could be holding it back, another sort of 5%. And it's just the worst case scenario. It's quite a old benchmark. I think this is probably one of the first benchmarks, or one of the very early one that was 3D Mark anyway. So it's a DirectX 11 benchmark. So maybe it's just not as optimized as some of the others, which probably plays into the hands a bit more of the 5800X. Who knows? But it is GPU bound anyway. So, but yeah, in conclusion then, so the 8600G, I think it is a great entry level processor. It will do you for that 12 months. And then maybe, like I said, pair it with a dedicated graphics card for another sort of £300-400. I reckon this build, you could probably do it for about £700 all in, just for your, for like the case, power supply and everything. And then spend that over sort of £300-400 12 months after that, and then even 12 months after that, maybe you can think about upgrading your CPU. you know, once you're on the platform, you're good. If AM4 is anything to go by, like we said, it's going to be, you're going to be in a sort of 10-year stint probably. But yeah, so just beware though, like I say, once you're on the system, it's something you're probably not aware of. But if you've got an activated Windows key, you can normally change processors, memory, graphics cards, no problem. But as soon as you change the motherboard, that's when Microsoft's like, no, I want more money. You might get away with it if it's the same chipset, but I've even known it to, like, you know, kick you out for that as well. But normally it's like if you change the chipset, it's definitely, it will kick you out. It'll unregister, or it'll try you to get you to, you know, re-register or activate your code with another key. So that's something to bear in mind. That's why, like I was saying, once you're on the AM5 platform, you're in a good place. So, but yeah, I think it's a good option. Let me know in the comments if you think, if you agree, if you think it's a good idea. For a budget build. Remember, this is not like, oh, it's not, I'm not calling it a gaming build by any means. It's a entry level budget build to get you on the AM5 platform, and then you can work up in the following sort of years and get yourself in a good place. But yeah, I thought it was going to be an interesting video. I've got another video coming up. I've got hold of a 9800 X3D. I'm going to compare it against my 9700X because I made some comments in another video. So I'm going to sort of just show you what I mean with that and put it through its paces. So I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys. Take care.